Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Beor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of the world's greatest knowledge. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering. Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Beor. Gnosis is the root wisdom of the world's greatest knowledge. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of hundreds available as free downloads, podcasts, or transcriptions. Our lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. We invite you to browse our library of lectures to find teachings that suit you. Twice a month, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live and includes a free online classroom allowing listeners to see images, read related scriptures, and ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate, visit gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is a service of Glorian Publishing, a non-profit organization. The lectures and radio broadcast have been made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. Most spiritual schools recommend a donation of $10 to $20 per lecture. To make a donation, visit gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy.
Today we will continue describing the fundamental importance of one of the most important symbols of Asian mysticism, which is called the Bhavachakra. The Bhavachakra is symbolized as a great wheel that has 6 regions. Most people call it the Wheel of Samsara, or the Wheel of Suffering. But as we've explained in these recent classes, the name Bhavachakra actually means the wheel of becoming. And that difference is really significant. It represents how forces work in nature, specifically in relationship with our consciousness. That is the very essence of our being, how we experience existence. And our experience of existence is determined by ourselves, by our own actions. How we behave, not only physically, but especially psychologically. That behavior as a consciousness, as a being, is what determines our experience of existence. What this reveals to us is very profound. It reveals that the way most people understand the wheel of life is wrong, because most people assume that karma is a fixed destiny and that suffering is the rule and is inescapable, and this is wrong. And people assume that life is just pain and that the only way to find happiness is to accumulate as many pleasant sensations as possible, as quickly as possible before we die. This is also wrong. What the Bhavachakra reveals to us is that our experience of existence can be changed. It can be changed simply by modifying how we behave now. physically and psychologically. And those changes in our behavior determine our next experiences. And this is very easy for us to confirm. So today we're going to explain how specifically we can acquire the changes that we want. Now, we start this type of lecture with a certain assumption. And I'll state it explicitly just to make it clear so that we're all on the same page. The assumption is you're listening to this type of information and studying this type of material because you want to escape suffering. You're tired of suffering. You want to know something about reality, about the truth, about heaven, about God, about divinity. Whatever terms you want to use, the root attraction or draw of spirituality and religion is that. The longing, the urgency in one's heart to be happy, genuinely happy, and to know something about reality and the meaning of life. So I state that explicitly because even though most listeners and students of this tradition have that longing, we all have it in different degrees. And that distinction needs to be clear in our own mind for ourselves. How strong that longing is, especially in relationship with our other longings. Because that contradiction is the origin of much of our suffering. We have different competing longings and desires, and the conflict between them is the origin of a lot of our pain. So studying this type of material hopefully begins to reveal to us the distinction. And then it's up to us to empower one side or the other, but to do it consciously. In this tradition, we point out 3 factors. These 3 factors exist in every religion, in every philosophy that emerged out of the divine. And I explain it that way because there are many religions and philosophies that did not come from the divine. We need to understand that too. These 3 factors are universal in all genuine mystical traditions, in all genuine mystical philosophies that can actually lead us to experience reality. And those 3 factors are characterized as death, birth, and sacrifice. We have many lectures and books about these 3 factors that explain them, that elaborate them. They're very deep, very comprehensive. These 3 simple terms explain everything about religion. And for us to make our own spiritual practice effective, we need to make sure in our daily observation and effort to know ourselves, we need to confirm that these 3 are at play, that we are actually implementing them, that we are living by them. Death, birth, and sacrifice. We talk about death in the sense of the death of our defects, the death of our impurities, the death of the causes of suffering. All of those parts of ourselves that need to be eliminated. So for that to happen, we need to know about them. We need to see them. We need to observe them, study them, get to know them. The second factor is birth, and that is the emergence of new life in us. The birth of the soul, the birth of wisdom, the birth of the bodhisattva, or a Buddha, or a master, or a pure elemental. At whatever level we will reach, is that birth of the newness of our life. And the third is sacrifice. We explain sacrifice generally to mean charity, to serve others, to help humanity, to give up our own interests and desires and longings in order to serve and aid others, to put others before ourselves, to emulate the great masters who did not seek to feed themselves, their desires, their name, their reputation, but only to serve others. So in a simple, quick explanation, that's what those three factors are. And they're present in every teaching. Jesus taught them in Matthew 16:24 in a very simple way that's very easy to misunderstand and take for granted. He stated, if any will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Now, of course, most people who study Christianity or the teachings of Jesus read that and take it very superficially and think it means that they have to just say some words and study the Bible. And that's more or less all they have to do. But that's not what Jesus said at all. In fact, that statement contains all three factors. Let him deny himself is death. To deny oneself is to deny the false self. To deny one's lust, pride, anger, envy, gluttony, greed, laziness, etc. All of the many defects that we have that are characterized in the Christian tradition as Satan. Our own ego, in other words. To take up his cross is birth. The cross represents how forces in nature engage to create life. The cross represents masculine crossed with feminine to create life. It is a symbol of alchemy or tantra. So that take up his cross does not mean to make a cross in your garage and carry it, or to hang a cross on your wall, etc. It's something psychological and spiritual and energetic in ourselves. And sacrifice is, and follow me, to emulate the example that Jesus provided in his life, which is to serve others with humility, but primarily and most importantly, with love. This is the greatest teaching that Jesus gave, is by his example. So these three factors are taught in all Gnostic schools. They're taught in all the genuine religions in different ways. In Buddhism, we find it hidden in a variety of ways. The synthesis of Buddhism is often repeated in many traditions as, commit not a single unwholesome action, cultivate a wealth of virtue, tame this mind of ours. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. So the three factors are hidden there in a Buddhist presentation. More specifically, we find them in the three grounds. The three grounds that lead to liberation from suffering. In Buddhism, these are called bhavana, dana, and sila. Bhavana means cultivation of mind. Now, I put this word mind in quotes because Asians know that this word mind does not mean intellect, but Westerners don't realize that. So Westerners read cultivation of mind, and they assume it means the cultivation of that me, myself, that's always talking in my head. It does not mean that. That me, myself, that's always talking in our head is the ego. Because that me, myself, is all of our desires and longings and fears. It's our personality. It's all of our subjective elements. It is not the being. It is not divinity. So I put in after mind consciousness. Because really, in the Buddhist tradition, the words that are used for mind, they're different words, but they all point towards mind-heart, which is more accurately consciousness. It's not referring to the mind-heart we have here. It's referring to something much more abstract. The ground consciousness, or the fundamental root of what we call being. So that bhavana, or cultivation, relates specifically to learning how to pay attention, to be here and now, to be present, to meditate, to have insight into reality, to awaken. To arrive at that awakening is only possible when the elements that produce sleep and discord are removed. So in synthesis, bhavana is death, the factor of death. The cultivation of awareness, of consciousness, of mind arises spontaneously when we remove the causes of suffering, of our sleep, when we remove the defects. In Tibetan Buddhism, that cultivation of mind is called lojong, which means mind training. And it is primarily about removing afflictions from the mind stream. The second of the three grounds is called dana. And that simply means generosity, giving, service, or sacrifice, in other words. And the final is sila, virtue, morality, purity. And that is obviously birth, the birth of the new way of being. So those three factors are hidden in the Buddhist tradition behind Sanskrit and Pali words. Same three factors. What's interesting when you study these different religions, when you apply these different religions, you find that everybody interprets them differently, and everybody applies them according to their own level and their own understanding. And the problem is that because our mind is not tame, and because we have such a strong conflict in us between all the different longings, we generally lose sight of these fundamentals. And we generally modify our understanding in order to give ourselves room to continue being the way we've always been. In other words, people apply these techniques only up to a certain limit. They apply them within their comfort zone, but not beyond that. And this is natural and normal, but unfortunately is the cause of a lot of problems in spiritual movements. So in other words, we find spiritual movements where these teachings are presented, and everyone talks in a beautiful way about the three factors, about the death of desire or death of ego, about the birth of virtue or the natural mind, about service for humanity and sacrifice for others. But at the same time, we find that these people are ruled by their pride, are motivated by envy, are enslaved by their lust. And this proves, without any doubt, that those teachings, those factors, are not being applied. Maybe in a little, small, shallow way to some insignificant things, but not to the primary causes of the problems. You see, if there are problems in a temple, in a group, in a movement, in a school, it's because the members are not living by these factors. It's simple. The causes of discord are inside of us, not outside. If we find discord outside of us, conflicts, fighting, gossip, scandalous situations, it's because those are inside of us and they're not being changed. It's important for us to be very sincere about our analysis of these factors, because in order for us to advance, they need to be put into play in a balanced way. Death obviously refers to working on one's egos, to analyzing our defects, to trying to change. And birth comes naturally from that, if one is applying the teachings in the right way, transmuting energy, saving energy, not wasting energy, working with the practices in a healthy, upright way. So birth and death, people can generally grasp some degree of their meaning. And it's interesting for instructors that most people who learn about the three factors rarely ask questions about birth and death. It's interesting. Most people don't ask much about death. Maybe it's because most people don't want to die, psychologically speaking. And most don't ask much about birth. The real questions always come up. What about service? What about sacrifice? How do I help others? This is the part that people get stuck on. So that's today's lecture. Is it going to be about that? What is it to serve, to sacrifice? But in order to understand that, you need to first have in mind the first two factors, death and birth. To explain sacrifice, first I want to talk about some of these terms so that we can be clear on the meaning and the roots of the words. Service, in English, is rooted in French and some older terms that are previous to that, including Latin. So service actually means a celebration of a public worship. The original usage in English comes from that. So that's why we could go to a religious service, like a mass or a group prayer. But the root of that in Latin comes from servitude or slavery, which is a very strange relationship. In Sanskrit, we find another interesting correlation. The word for service in Sanskrit is seva, which, to my mind, looks very much like service. Very similar. And in fact, a lot of the English and French and Latin terms can be traced back to Sanskrit. So there may be a relationship that the etymologists don't know about these days. But the word seva, which is used in karma yoga, means service and devotion. It means worship and reverence, but it can also mean sexual relations. It's a very interesting fact that very few people know, even though it's in the dictionary. Now, if you study Hinduism or any form of traditional yoga, not the modern exercises that people call yoga, but actual yoga, the word seva is very important. If you attend any Hindu temple or Hindu tradition, all students, all devotees are expected to perform seva. So if you go and stay at a temple, or you visit a temple, or you go visit a teacher, it's a normal process for you to contribute according to your abilities. It may be to sweep, to wash dishes, to cook food, to help the elderly, to help clean the place, to perform service. Quote, as a slave, as a servant, with humility, to put yourself to work in order to keep that temple functional. This is a normal part of Hinduism and Buddhism. In the West, we don't have that. Westerners expect other people to do all that stuff. Westerners just want to come in, take whatever they can take, and get out before the offering bowl comes around. But in the East, it's not like that. In the East, it's well understood that when you're receiving a teaching, you need to give something back. You need to do your part. It's reciprocal. This is the most basic, foundational, kindergarten level of service, of sacrifice. It is to contribute to your spiritual nourishment. Who is nourishing you spiritually? You should return the favor. That's the most basic level of sacrifice. To help your church, to contribute to your temple, to your teacher, whatever that place happens to be. A church, a temple, a synagogue, a mosque, it doesn't matter. But that basic practice is considered for beginners. And it's in the East assumed that everyone will do it. No one says anything, no one asks you. You just show up and you do it. If you see something that needs to be done, you do it. You don't have to ask. In the West, it's different. They have to make lists and charts, and you didn't do your service today, and they get after you about it because people here have a different mentality. Sacrifice is different. Again, we look at, in English, the word comes from French and Latin, and it again relates to religious functions. Service relates to religious services, right? But sacrifice comes from priestly functions. So where the service is more in the congregation, The sacrifice is more in relation with the priests. It's a different level. And the word really comes from sacred rites, which you can see here in the etymology that I've given you. If you compare that with the Hebrew, you find that this word sacrifice is even more compelling, because it can mean not only religious functions, but it can also mean slaughter. It can mean to kill. Now, if you back away from these terms a little bit and you remember the three factors, it all makes sense. Birth and death and sacrifice are three factors, but you cannot separate them and affect anything beneficial. To really put these three factors in motion in your life, you need to learn to see them as one thing. Three sides of one thing, which is simply to be consciously active. Birth, death, and sacrifice are just three faces of one action. And when you really study birth, death, and sacrifice in your own efforts to awaken and change, you will discover that it's true. You cannot have a birth without a death, and you cannot have a death without a sacrifice. It's self-evident. And that's the meaning of the scriptures. And we find that throughout the scriptures. In the Bible, for example, we find many examples of sacrifices. These sacrifices are symbolic. Some of them are actually black magic, because the Bible has been modified. We'll talk about that briefly in a moment. But the genuine sacrifices, such as, for example, when Isaac needs to be sacrificed, when the angel commands Isaac to be sacrificed, that's a symbol. It represents something in relation with our soul. But that sacrifice represents how we must sacrifice ourselves. And in that sacrifice of ourselves, we have to die. How can you have a sacrifice without death? But the emergence after that death will be a birth of something new. So you see those three factors are one, not separate. You can't teach them separately. You can't practice them separately. You can't only talk about death. What would be the point of only talking about death if you don't talk about what comes as a result of that? And death itself is a sacrifice. So you always have to talk about all three. Traditionally, we find sacrifice is very mystically presented in religion. But because our minds have degenerated so much, we have completely misinterpreted it. Nowadays, we look back at our ancients and think that they were terrible, awful. We condemn them and think we were much better than the ancient ones because we misread our own traditions. We misunderstand our own scriptures. We don't realize that our mythologies are mythology. Stories that teach something true, but that are not literal. For example, in the Bible we have the story of Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve. And everybody nowadays thinks that they were actual people, that there was a Cain and there was an Abel, and that Cain killed Abel. And somehow all of humanity came after that. But they're not literal people. They're symbols of the soul and the mind in us. What's interesting in the story of Cain and Abel is both of them are making sacrifices to divinity. Cain, who's called a hunter, has his sacrifice. He sacrifices what he gathers from nature. But Abel sacrifices his most precious lamb that he raised, that he loved, that he cared for. And that's what he gave. And God appreciated that more. That's why Cain became jealous and killed Abel. Envy because of Abel's sacrifice. But people read that and think it's literal and that Abel actually killed the lamb. Why does God need us to kill a lamb? God is God, and if God needs the lamb, he can kill it himself. He doesn't need a person to kill a lamb. What does that prove? It doesn't prove anything. We kill to eat anyway. How is killing to eat or killing to give God any different? Why does God need someone to kill an animal? It makes no sense unless you think about it as a myth and you think about it as symbolic, and then it makes sense. The lamb represents Christ, the Lamb of God. Christ is the Son of God, the light that emerges out of the absolute. It is the fire that gives life to all things. Abel is the soul who's giving his very life for others. He's emulating Christ, sacrificing himself. But Abel, doing that, doesn't make sense to Cain, who's the mind, the ego, who sees that and becomes jealous, envious, angry, proud. That's what the story means. That's easy to see. That's the conflict that's in us. So when we take that understanding and we look at the other traditions, we find the same thing. And we see how these other traditions lost sight of the meanings of sacrifice. The very ancient Americans, in the beginning, sacrificed properly. But as their traditions degenerated, they began to sacrifice living things, including people. It's a grave crime to kill. For what? Likewise, amongst other traditions, amongst the Greeks, we find symbolized many traditions of killing animals to give to the gods. But people nowadays don't understand that's symbolic. But animals are our mind. It is our animal lust, our animal anger, our animal envy that we have to sacrifice, that we have to put into the fire, the Christic fire, to burn up, to return those elements back to God. That's the most beautiful sacrifice. But the Greeks gradually forgot those things and were misguided, misled, and led into committing black magic. And that's why in the Bible we find some examples of black magic. Sacrificing animals, sacrificing things that don't mean anything to us, but we're doing it to get power or to get favors. That's the nature of black magic. So we need to be clear about this. Sacrifice exists in white, pure traditions, and also in the black ones. To understand this better, let's read this quote from Bodhisattva Charyavatara, which is also called the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, by Shantideva. It's the most important scripture of Mahayana Buddhism. And this is one of my favorite quotes. It says, "All whosoever are happy in the world are so through the wish for the happiness of others, while all whosoever are miserable in the world are so through the wish for the happiness of themselves." But what need is there to elaborate more? Just look at the difference between the two. An infantile person acting for his own self-aims, and sage, the Buddha, acting for the aims of others. This short passage illustrates the distinction that needs to be clear when we observe our own behaviors. When we want to understand sacrifice and what it means, this quote elaborates what it means. Let me talk briefly about that first part of the quote, because I know the way it's translated here is a little hard to grasp. What it's basically saying is, all the happiness in the world came about from serving others, from doing for others. And all the misery and unhappiness in the world came about from serving oneself. And if you really observe your own experience of life, you can see the truth of it. Those people who are concerned about themselves, focused on themselves, they don't produce happiness for anyone else. And they certainly don't produce any happiness for themselves. Because as much as they try to feed their desire, the desire only grows. It's never satisfied. And yet those who are truly made happy are made happy when someone helps them. Isn't it true? So that quote is illustrating something significant about the nature of generosity or giving. The nature of sacrifice. To understand that better, we can look at the tree of life. The tree of life, which is a symbol that most people associate with Kabbalah, but is present in all religions, illustrates for us the structure of existence. We see in this graphic what at first glance can appear quite complicated. But if you study it, you'll find that it's actually quite simple and very intuitive. This structure illustrates how nature functions in a process of laws. From the most rarefied, pure regions of existence down to the most dense. There is a stratification, many levels. So at the top of this graphic, we see the absolute. It is the uncreated, the unmanifested, pure potentiality, without any differentiation. No measure, no weight, no space, no time. Something, but that is not yet. And when that manifests, it manifests as a light. Every tradition has symbols of that light. We call it Christ, which is from Greek Christos, which esoterically means fire. Light. But that fire is not physical fire or literal fire. It means the fire that's burning in every atom. The fire of existence. A living thing. It is something alive. That first emergence is characterized in different religions as a trinity, as a 3-in-1. So Christianity represents it as the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In Hinduism, it's represented as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. In Buddhism, it's the Trikaya, Dharmakaya, Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya. That 3-in-1 simply represents how that one light first manifests and contains in itself the archetypes of everything. The archetypes, the blueprints, the potential. So let's understand that in synthesis, this is a light fire, an intelligence that is one thing, but is three things. We call it also the three forces. So Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, or the first logos, second logos, third logos. These are the forces that create. Three forces to create anything. That is reflected here physically. To create here physically always takes three forces. So what is our greatest creative power? To create life, sex. And to create life, you need three factors, three forces. A man, a woman, and sex. Those are the three factors, the three forces. What's curious about that is that we find this structure of three repeated down this tree of life. We have an upper trinity, we have a middle trinity, we have a lower trinity, and then we have a single sphere by itself. And then that whole thing is reflected, inverted at the bottom. Three trinities. And then one by itself. So there we have 10 spheres hanging in space, you could say. The 10th one is our physicality. It's the physical world. It's our physical body. It is where we are here and now. This realm, which can be called the kingdom, is the condensation, the accumulation of the stratified levels above it on this graphic. So everything that descended from above is made concrete here. Meaning that this world is a reflection of all those laws above us. Meaning we can find them here. And we can work with them here. If we're smart. If we're intelligent. If we know how. The law of three is an example of that. We can create life. But there's only one way to do it. All the scientists think they're going to find another way. But they can't. As close as they get, all they're doing is playing with matter. When they're trying to create a living thing in a laboratory, they can't do it. The only way you can create a living thing is by a sexual combination. Masculine, feminine, and the sexual force that unites them. Three forces create. Three forces also destroy. So when all those forces and energies which descend down this ray of creation, they create all the worlds above us, all the heavens, finally condensing here physically. They are flowing through us, through our three brains, through our three nervous systems, right now, all the time. Every energy, every quanta of energy we use contains the atomic power of those three forces. And you know what happens when you split an atom. There's a lot of energy there. But that energy is moving through us now, through our intellect, through our heart, through our body. How do we use it? Not only individually, but collectively. The state of our planet reveals how we're using it. We're not using those three forces in ourselves to create life. We're using them to destroy life. Sure, lots of people are having sex and having babies. But those babies are growing up to create atomic weapons, chemical weapons, pornography, crime, subterfuge. Where do we see true creativity that reflects the spirit, the being, Christ? We don't. So in synthesis, we can say the three forces create birth, death, and sacrifice. Whoops, I went too far. Again, I went too far. I'm trying to use this technology and it's angry with me because I'm talking against it. Okay. Birth, death, and sacrifice. The energy that's flowing through us every day, every moment, we are using it. We convert that energy through our actions. The problem is we don't analyze how we do it. We don't have any wisdom to use it well. We don't have the skill to use it well. We don't have the training. We don't have the understanding to understand and see how our actions affect everyone else. We have this myopic, conscious blindness. We think that we exist in a little bubble and that our thoughts and our feelings are our own and that whatever we think and feel and do only affects us and that we are isolated and alone. And we're wrong on all counts. Dead wrong. We are not isolated in any fashion. Not at all. Not physically, not emotionally, not intellectually, not spiritually. there is absolutely zero isolation among us. The sensation of isolation is an illusion that is self-propagated. It is a lie, an illusion produced by the ego itself. The result is, because we think and feel that we are in our own little shell and can do our own little thing, we indulge in crime, psychologically, spiritually, even physically, and think it won't affect anyone. In the sense that we know the commandment says, "Thou shalt not kill," but we think that means physically. It doesn't. It means emotionally. It means spiritually. It means psychologically. When you speak badly against a person, when you criticize a person, you kill their image. When you tell your friend, "You know what that guy did? He did this and that. Can you believe it?" And the other person is shocked and they say, "I can't believe it. I thought he was so nice. He was terrible." In that person's mind, their image of them has been killed. They will never trust that person again. Their heart is closed. That is murder. Psychologically. And what if it's happening on a greater scale? What if what we're saying is a lie? What if it isn't true? It's worse. So this is true of all the sins and defects. Envy, fear, pride, lust, gluttony, greed, all of them. Those are constantly in motion in our psychological mind stream. We're converting those forces and energies that are flowing into us. Those forces and energies are dying, sacrificed through our action, and giving birth to pain, to defects, to suffering. So everybody says, where does suffering come from? Why did God create suffering? God didn't make it. We did. God gave us free will. The universe is simply there. It is a set of forces and laws and energies that we can use according to our will. What is our will? Clearly, it is evil. It is impure. It is polluted. And we use our energy to create pain. So, we can change that. If we're sincere, we can change it. Let's see what the scriptures say. There's a scripture that says, action does indeed bind the self, except when done as sacrifice. So action must be consecrated, offered to deity high above. When beings came from Creator, He ordained all to sacrifice. By sacrifice are worlds sustained, and by it everyone does live. This is a beautiful statement that I think if you didn't know where it came from, even if you studied many religions, you probably couldn't guess where it came from. And that's why I didn't tell you yet where it's from, because I want to tease you. Let's talk about what this means. Action does indeed bind the self, except when done as sacrifice. Action. Anyone know how to say action in Sanskrit? Karma. The word karma literally just means an act. But we interpret it and understand it to mean action and consequence. Now in the West, it's completely misunderstood, and people think karma just means punishment. It doesn't mean that. It means action and consequence. Good or bad? What this passage is stating is that action binds the self, except when it's done as a sacrifice. So then we need to know, what is a sacrifice? Remember, the word sacrifice can mean a priestly function, and it can mean an act of killing. So it says, so action must be consecrated, offered to deity high above. So the answer is there. If we perform our actions in remembrance of God, in remembrance of the divine, in remembrance of the being, that is, cognizant, aware, performing the action with wisdom, then the consequences of the action do not bind one to the wheel of becoming. You see, all the beings in existence are bound to existence because of their actions. Because their actions were not done as sacrifice. Their actions were done for self. If we learn to perform our actions, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, consciously, always cognizant of others, then we can unbind ourselves. This is the meaning. When we learn to turn our action, physical, emotional, mental, conscious, away from self-love, self-obsession, instead we love others, we love our neighbor as ourself, instead of loving ourselves as ourselves, then we turn the wheel of becoming towards the favor of everyone. So the second part says, when beings came from Creator, He ordained all to sacrifice. By sacrifice our worlds sustained, and by it everyone does live. This is also a very powerful statement that is completely misunderstood in modern times. By sacrifice are worlds sustained, and by it does everyone live. Now, this doesn't mean that if we start sacrificing animals to the gods, that we'll sustain life. Doesn't mean that. But some people have interpreted it that way. Or if we do sacrifices of butter or lamps or sacrifices in the temple or doing rituals, that will sustain life. It does not mean that. By sacrifice our world sustained refers to how that light emerges out of the absolute, because that emergence is a sacrifice. That light is called Christ. And when that light emerges and begins to create, it creates through its own sacrifice. It gives itself so that others may live. In each birth, something dies. And in each death, something is born. And in each birth and each death, there is a sacrifice of life. That life is the root force. It is Christ itself. When you eat something, you kill something. But the death of that thing gives you life. It is sacrificed so that you live. Every time you breathe, you kill the chemicals, the gases that you breathe in. Those elements of nature which have life in their level die. They are sacrificed on the cross of existence so that you may live. All the clothes that you're wearing were made through the sacrifice of someone's time and energy, who may have suffered terribly to make them. But we remain completely ignorant of it. No idea. We don't grow our own food. We don't raise our own food. We don't kill our own meat. Somebody does it for us. And then we take it all for granted, and we keep living without any cognizance that every step of the way there is sacrifice for there to be birth. There is death for there to be birth. That's what this means. And it is especially true spiritually. Studying all this would be very interesting if it were just taken materialistically, but that's not why we're here. We want to change. We want to experience the reality. we want to overcome suffering. This image of Christ crucified represents the three factors perfected. Completely perfected. It's unfortunate now that this image of the Christ crucified carries so much psychological baggage, so much spiritual baggage, that we can no longer see the image for what it actually represents. Now we look at it and we think of the atrocities that were committed by the churches. And we think of the fanatics who blindly follow dogmatic interpretations of the teachings of Jesus without any comprehension of their meaning. And so we see this image and it conjures up negative emotions in many people. And that's really unfortunate because it's a beautiful representation of the function of nature at the highest levels. And it's a beautiful representation of what we must perform if we wish to reach those levels spiritually. This image shows Yeshua, the Savior, giving his last breath, his last drop of blood, so that others may live. That is the nature of a bodhisattva. The bodhisattva, which we explained in the previous 2 lectures, never seeks to serve him or herself, but lives and dies for you and for everyone else. And we have many beautiful examples of that type of psychology in Jesus, Abraham, Moshe, Moses, Milarepa, Buddha, Joan of Arc. Many examples, beautiful teachers who lived that. So in this particular image, we see above the cross that cryptic mantra, INRI, I-N-R-I, which superficially is translated to mean Yeshua, King of the Jews. But really, those 3 letters hide many things. Specific to this lecture, it hides 4 Latin words. Ignis naturae renovatur integra. And that means the fire renews nature incessantly. But how does it do it? Well, let's look at nature. Become a scientist and imagine nature, the whole planet. Imagine the planet there in your laboratory. You're a scientist in a spaceship, and you've got the whole planet there in your hologram deck or whatever those things are called. And you're able to turn it and look at it and see all the living things on this planet. And look at it scientifically and see, how is life sustained on this world? And it's very simple and very profound. It is sustained through death, through birth, and through sacrifice. Inescapable. And yet, all of the foolish intellectual animals, which is us, think that we don't need to listen to that we can circumvent death, we can avoid death, we don't have to deal with death, we can extend our lives indefinitely, we can put our brains into machines. And people are literally trying to do that. You'd be surprised how much money is being spent right now to try to prolong the existence of our putrid minds. And we think that we can overcome nature's process of birth and create life in a laboratory. And we think that sacrifice, that's just a theory. We foolishly think about life in a completely wrong way. Spiritually speaking, in order to reach the highest levels, we have to come into balance with nature. We have to learn about nature and work in harmony with nature. We cannot change the laws of nature, but we can ascend beyond them. In this level, birth, death, and sacrifice are the law. So we have to learn to work with that and learn to work with it in harmony, especially spiritually. So the fire renews nature incessantly. What is the fire? We're not talking about physical fire. We're talking about the Christ, the light, the Ein Sof. That Ein Sof ore that emerges out of the Absolute and produces that first Trinity. That is the fire. And that fire descends through all the stratifications of nature, all the way down to this level where we are. Even though we think we're in the greatest place in the universe, it's actually very low, very dense. But this world is a reflection of that ray. And everything that has existence has that fire inside of it. It's a Christic fire. It's the force of life, the force of being. That is the fire that constantly renews nature. And how does it do it? Through those three forces. Everything dies. There is no exception. I apologize if you didn't realize it. But it's true. We will die. That is unavoidable. But what is modifiable is what that death will create. Death is not an end of something. It is a beginning of something. When we die, something will be born. But that depends on the type of death. So physically that's true, but especially spiritually that's true. Will our death emulate this example and be a sacrifice? And what about today? In each moment, we are dying. And in each moment, we are being born. You need to eat and drink and sleep because your body is dying and being born at the same time. And so on the cross of your body, you are sacrificing energy constantly in order to be born anew each day. You're creating new cells, rejuvenating organs, growing, just physically. But that's not that important. What about psychologically? What about spiritually? The fire flows into us. It's sacrificed on the cross of our three brains. It dies in order for the sparks of cognizance to flow through us. That is what we call awareness, perception, feelings, thoughts, sensations. Those don't just happen. They are the firing, the explosions of energy being sacrificed and creating those sensations, those thoughts, those feelings. Birth, death, and sacrifice. Every thought is the death of energy and the creation of energy. A sacrifice. Every emotion, when you feel that anger blossom in your heart, you get really mad, there's a sacrifice. Something dies, something is born. There's a sacrifice there. There's an action. Then you have to ask yourself, in this inri, in this fire that's renewing my nature, what am I creating? What am I destroying? Am I helping myself or helping others? Am I following the example of the great teachers, or am I following the example of Satan, who serves only himself? That scripture continues, things exist through all other things. All things are knit with all others, so that the being of a thing is contribution by others. No one exists independently, as all are, also all others. Thus, existence of anything is sacrifice by other things. This is worthy of meditation. A lot of meditation. This illustrates the core principle of Buddhism, which is interdependence. It is the core principle of the Bhavachakra. It is what is represented in the 12 nidanas around the Bhavachakra. It is dependent origination. It is pratitya samutpada. Interdependence. But this is not from Buddhism. I'm teasing you more. Because I know some of you are like, what is that scripture? What's it from? It's not Buddhism. Another hint. I'll tell you in a few minutes. Things exist through all other things. All things are knit with all others, so that the being of a thing is contribution by others. We all have this illusion that we are isolated and exist in a bubble. It's a lie. Absolutely every particle that you experience as yourself, you got from somebody else. Can you deny it? You got your body from your parents. You got your personality from your parents, your siblings, your friends, your schoolmates, your teachers, your culture, your religion, your city, your state, your country. You didn't invent any of that. And yet you clutch onto it as if it was me. But all of it was given to you by someone else. None of it's genuine. None of it's real. None of it's lasting. It's all impermanent. It will all die. No one exists independently, as all are, also all others. Thus, existence of anything is sacrificed by other things. Physically speaking, we're all here because our parents gave birth to us. And our parents were here because their parents gave birth to them. And that's the process of birth and death and sacrifice from generation to generation. It's undeniable. But it's deeper than that. Merely on the physical level, the literal level, we don't understand this at all. Because we persist in the illusion that we are in an isolated bubble and that we're alone and that everything we do is just about us and we don't affect anyone and no one affects us. It's all an illusion. None of our thoughts are original. None of our feelings are original, unique. That feeling, that sense of self, of me, is no different than the pride of any other person. Your own anger, your resentment, is no different than anyone else's. Moreover, everything that you have and everything that you experience as yourself at this level depends entirely on everything else. It is not independent. Nothing about us is independent. Nothing about us exists independently. We exist at this level because of a very delicate balance of very subtle things. If we modified our atmosphere by the smallest fraction, there would be no life on this planet. If we modified the position of the planet in space by a fraction, there would be no life here. None. It's so delicate. Just balanced. Just so. But we take it for granted. What about our own life? Just physically. A little tiny microbe can kill us. One little microbe. What kind of power do we have then? What kind of independent existence do we have when all around us are the constant threats to end that existence as we know it? One distracted moment is enough for us to be killed. To step in front of a car, to touch a live wire and be shocked, to drink a poison, to do something foolish and die, especially when you're driving a car. One flash of not paying attention and you're dead. And there are many cases like that. So where is our independent existence? We are very dependent on many things. I mentioned our food and water. If there were not many people elsewhere growing food and raising food, we wouldn't be able to survive. We're dependent on so many things. But most importantly is to analyze this spiritually. Spiritually speaking, this is especially true. This bubble that we believe we exist in is a complete illusion. And it's easy to see past it if we simply make the attempt. Have you not noticed that you can, for example, step into an elevator and there's other people, but you can sense when somebody behind you is really angry or upset? You don't even have to see them, but you can feel it. Or you go into any place, you can sense someone's emotion when it's strong. Isn't it true? Or, for example, you can be walking along and suddenly you turn to look and someone's looking at you. You sensed it. You didn't see it, but you felt it. How is that? How is it that we sense one another's feelings and thoughts, even though we're not paying attention to it? It's because they affect us. We do affect each other. We're just not aware of it. The surprising truth is, when you actually begin to awaken consciousness and to pay attention, you realize this humanity is a collective mind. Everyone thinks that they are an individual, but there are no individuals here. We are all part of one cloth, trapped in the illusion that we are separate, but we are not. We are like particles of water in a wave in the ocean, each drop thinking, I'm just a drop, and I'm just flowing along here, not realizing that we are just part of the wave, swept along with no control, no awareness. To become an individual is something unique. It requires cognizance. It requires the death of the impurity and the birth of the soul. And that's only acquired through sacrifice. The sacrifice of the old, the sacrifice of the impure, the sacrifice of the illusion. That's the nature of the work. This passage is pointing out how the Christ flows through nature. And it summarizes in saying, all this then is sacrifice alone. As yanya known, the holy deed one does belongs wholly to everyone and everything. This passage is pointing out, it summarizes the previous ones that I read to you. And just to give you a synthesis, because I know everyone already forgot what I read. What this is stating is, if you perform your actions for the benefit of others, in remembrance of divinity, and with cognizance and love, any action becomes sacrifice. It becomes consecrated. It becomes holy. It becomes a pure act. In other words, it becomes a reflection of Christ in the world. It's Christified, consecrated. Therefore, it deserves the term yanya. Yanya is Sanskrit, and it means sacrifice. Nowadays, the term is interpreted to literally mean priestly functions in a temple where ordained priests offer elements to a fire. And they chant mantras and they put in butter and other substances into a fire. And that's what people understand now as yanya. It's just like in every other religion where it's been reduced down to the most literal physical interpretation. But that's not why this was written. Those traditions are beautiful and we respect them. But the meaning of the term applies to our action in every moment. refers to how every action that we perform is conditioned. That's actions of body, of heart, of mind. So the scripture is stating all existing things were put into existence for sacrifice in order to produce existence. And the one who comprehends that and acts in remembrance of that performs a holy action. In other words, stated simply, do goodness. Be kind. Comprehend your effects on others. And act as though everything that you interact with is Christ. That's how you consecrate your behavior. So now I'll tell you that this was all from the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is Sanskrit. It means the song of the Lord. And it's an excerpt from a much larger epic poem in Sanskrit called the Mahabharata, which means the great warrior. So that word yajna is really important. Translated literally, it means sacrifice, but it can also mean fire, worship, offering, praise, prayer, devotion. In the Vedic traditions, there is an entire science of sacrifice, of rituals. It's all literal and physical. That's not what we're referring to in these lectures. Again, beautiful traditions. But what we need in these moments is a profound psychological, spiritual sacrifice in ourselves. The term breaks down in a very interesting way. The first syllable is ya. And it's Sanskrit. It means light, wind, carriage, mover, or joiner. So, ya, everyone knows the terms Mahayana, Tantrayana, Sutrayana. That ya means vehicle. That which brings together. It's the thing that carries us from one place to another. Ya. Now, compare that with Hebrew. We all study Hebrew. We all know what Yah means. Yah is a name for divinity. E-O. Jupiter. Eopater. Jupiter. Yah. Or Jah. Hallelujah. That Yod-He, that Yah, is the same as here. It is the light of Christ. It is that first emergence. Yah. It is the fire. Isn't that beautiful? Hidden in the word sacrifice is the light, the fire of divinity. So the second part, Nya, means consciousness, knowledge, understanding, knowing, wise, having a soul. It literally means the thinking soul. It means the planet Mars. It can also mean the planet Mercury. I find this fascinating. That these specific elements are all implied by that letter. Now this word yanya is written with two letters. Ya, nya. And all of those meanings are hidden in that short passage, short phrase. Very beautiful. So let's synthesize what this means. If we learn to harness our nya, our consciousness, here and now, if we learn to be awake, and if we learn to act, learning from our masters, our teachers, to love others, to have more concern for others than for ourselves, to make sure and measure our every thought and feeling and action against that, to say, am I really doing best for myself or for others? Am I serving my pride? Or am I serving what's better for the group? What's better for the community? Am I chasing my lust? Or am I killing my desires in order to be a better representation of the light? We need to always have that process in play in us. That is to make our nya active. That becomes a sacrifice, doesn't it? Isn't it a sacrifice to deny oneself, as Jesus taught? To deny oneself, to say to one's own desire, no. Because to serve my own desire creates suffering for me and everyone else. When we do that, when we perform that sacrifice, we bring the presence of that divinity. We become more aware of others. That is an act of love. And when there is an act of love, how does that happen? It isn't in a bubble. It isn't in isolation. It is the very fire of Christ that is emerging in that moment, in all of the related atoms, in all of the particles, in everything. When you sincerely do a kind act for someone, when you give of yourself and you sacrifice for someone, you feel different. And the other person will feel it. And the environment can become charged. That's not an illusion. That's not invented. It's not made up. That's the fire of Christ in that environment that charges all the particles in that environment. When you go to a place where that type of action has been performed consistently, that environment is different. It is charged. And that's why in certain places you can feel the presence of something different. You can sense it with your heart. That's a literal, actual thing that happens. It's because the nya, the consciousness, has been activated through sacrifice. So the ya, the light, the wind, joins. It creates. There is birth of beauty, of love. So what's really profound about this for me is that it relates to another important word. The word prajna. If you've studied Buddhism or Hinduism, this word will be familiar to you, especially in Buddhism. Prajna means wisdom. It's also the highest of the paramitas, of the 7 paramitas, or 6 paramitas, rather. So it means intelligence, wisdom, or awareness. And the components, the nya is the same, but that first letter, pra, which actually here on this line is a typo. The letter is here. That pra means before. So prajna, wisdom, is referring to that which is before consciousness. That which is before knowledge. That which is before the soul. And what is before knowledge? It is Christ itself. So what we need to see then is how these paramitas work. I told you in the beginning that one of the 3 grounds is dana, generosity. It's also the first of the paramitas taught in Buddhism. A paramita, literally translated, means a perfection, like a jewel or a gem. But the meaning is, it's an attribute of consciousness. So dana, the first one, is generosity. The second is sila, which is ethics. The third is kshanti, patience. Fourth, virya, energy or diligence. The fifth is dhyana, which is concentration or meditation. And the 6th and final is prajna, wisdom. Many people read this and think that they need to work on each one of these individually and try to develop these characteristics. That's not how you approach this. The paramitas are simple to understand them, but very profound to actually experience. The paramitas are attributes of conscious action. They are not something that you can acquire and put in your pocket. They aren't medals or awards or achievements. They are qualities of a soul. So they are qualities of action. The way it works is quite simple. The very first paramita is one of the 3 grounds of Buddhism. So it's one of the most important things that Buddhists learn. It is dana, generosity. And in the beginners, as I told you, it begins with service. Helping in the temple, helping the monks and nuns, donating to the temple, supporting its activities, going and helping the poor and needy, etc., etc. Those types of actions. That's a kind of generosity, a kind of service. It is not sacrifice. It is service. It's good. It's needed. But it isn't sacrifice yet. But by doing that, by learning to act on behalf of others, if you do it in a cognizant way, you start to learn about ethics. Because then you learn, wow, if I do this good thing, if I really help this person, it makes us both happy. Not only that, when I really help someone else, I put them in a position so they can help others too. And so it becomes exponential. The more we help others, the more they can help others. And it spreads. That is the basis of ethics, where you start to learn. If I do something selfish for myself, I'm taking from others. I'm restricting others. I'm making others suffer, so then I suffer in turn. So generosity and ethics are totally intertwined. But in order to do that, when you start acting with ethics, serving others, you realize that to do that effectively, you need a lot of patience. Because to serve others isn't easy. People aren't gracious. They don't have gratitude. And to perform service for others, to serve, especially when it's not wanted or not recognized, and you don't get praise and you don't get recognized for that, difficult. And so to continue doing it takes patience. It takes serenity. To serve without expectation. To do it because it's right. And thus, by doing that, you're developing diligence. Right? To keep doing what you know is right, even though you're not necessarily seeing the fruits. You're being patient about it. You're doing it because it's right to serve others. So you're developing diligence. The energy to keep doing it. And that naturally, because you're making that effort, you're developing concentration. The ability to keep focused on that one thing. To keep moving and keep moving. And that in itself starts to open up how all this works together, and that gives you insight. Wisdom. Understanding. Compassion. That brings it back around at the beginning. That's how these paramitas work. They are all one thing, just like the 3 factors. This is just a more deep and more specific way of expressing the same teaching. Now, what I was pointing out to you before about jnana and prajna is that if you are able to perform every action in this way, when you go to your job and you have to deal with your coworkers, your customers, the people you work for, the people you work with, the public, your boss, and you go home and you have to deal with your family, and you go on the bus or the train, you have to deal with the public. If you can perform all those actions in a heightened state of the welfare of others, you are performing sacrifice in a very beginning way. Particularly if you're doing it with love. Not just because I told you so, or because you feel bad and you feel like, oh, I have to do something good, so I better do it, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble. That's not why. You do it because you sincerely see that people are suffering and you want to help them. That's what empowers this. It's love. It's when that type of love that you feel when you see someone who's sick or suffering or in pain, you forget yourself, don't you? When you see someone sick or suffering in pain, you're not thinking, oh, I really have to go to the grocery store. And here's this person bleeding all over the floor. What am I going to do now? You don't think that. You forget the grocery store and you leap to help. Isn't it true? If you see someone in danger, someone suffering in pain that you can actually do something for, you do it. This is a natural, spontaneous reflection of our true nature. It's altruism. It's love. We all have it, but we've lost touch with it. That simple quality, if we pay attention to it, if we remain aware of it, it can grow. And that is the seed of the bodhisattva. That is what the bodhisattva emerges out of. That. To be of that type of service, not just physically, but spiritually. Now, in order to do that, in order to enter into the bodhisattva path, properly speaking, as we explained previously, you have to reach a certain level. We're all beginners, so we just are aspiring to that. To really help people spiritually, you need to have something to offer. It's very beautiful to provide the teaching and help people and guide people. And in fact, that is the highest form of generosity. There are 3 types of generosity. The first is to give the teachings, to provide that to humanity. I think many students, when they read that, or they study that, or they hear about sacrifice, many get immediately intimidated and think, oh no, I have to go teach and be in front of a crowd. And no, it doesn't mean that. We're not all destined to be teachers. We each have our own vocation. We each have our inner being who has a skill, who has a mission, who has a gift that can reflect through us to help others. We each have our own. You will not find it by imitating anyone else. You will find it by being true to your being and allowing your being to guide you. And thus you can perform this type of generosity to give the teachings that liberate the consciousness, but give them in accordance with your own conscious idiosyncrasy, your own skill, a skill of your being. It might be teaching. It might be something else. It might be to support your tradition. An example that comes in my mind is a person, actually several people, from a tradition, Buddhist group that I used to visit. And this group of people decided one day that they were at an age in their lives, a time in their lives, when they had already raised their families. And they had already developed a place in the world where they had a steady lifestyle. And they wanted to really do something good for humanity. So this group of people said, okay, let's all collectively get together and we'll stay in one place, we'll live in one place, and we'll all keep our full-time jobs, but we'll turn all of our income over to the Dharma. This was a handful of people, 3 or 4. But they all had jobs that they took the entirety of their incomes and gave it to the teaching. And made an incredible impact in their whole region because they were able to open a big temple and host all kinds of events and bring people, teachers from all over, and made a big impact in that region because they had the ability, but they're also willing to make the sacrifice. That's an example. They weren't destined to be teachers, but they were in a position where they could help their teachers. In other cases, there are examples where to give the teachings, you may put out flyers. You may be in a position where you can write something. You can make art. You can make music. You can talk to your friends. You can give books away. You can just be an example. There are many ways to fulfill this type of generosity, to give the teachings, to help the teachings. Everyone has to find their relationship with that. But that's the highest form of generosity, or dana. The next below that is to give fearlessness or protection. That is in every possible way. So for example, if someone is in danger of being killed, but you remove them from that danger, you've performed a great act of generosity. You've preserved their life. But that's also true spiritually. It's also true emotionally. To give someone protection or a sense of safety or security is a big act of generosity. Parents do this for their kids, or they should. They should provide an environment for their children in which the children have no fear and are able to grow and fully flower. Some parents don't do that, and some parents create an atmosphere of threat where the children feel constantly threatened. And it's true in schools. For example, in many spiritual groups, the entire environment of the group is based in fear. That if you don't do this and do this and do this, you're going to go to hell. So that group, even though they think they're spiritual, they are not. Because they are not providing a sense of protection and fearlessness to their students, much less give the teaching. They're controlling or manipulating the students through fear. So the second type of generosity is to provide fearlessness, to provide a sense of being protected and safety. And the third and lowest type is to give material things. Again, these are three types of generosity. So let me explain why I'm talking about that, and then we'll wrap this up. These are three types of service, not sacrifice. Let's make that clear. They are types of generosity, ways to help people. They are not sacrifice. They can become sacrifice. So just because you give the teachings, you're teaching Buddhism or Christianity or you're teaching Gnosis, that doesn't mean you're sacrificing for humanity, especially if your pride's being fed, or if you're infecting all your students with all your negativity, like your pride, your lust, your envy, your fear. If you're infecting your students with that, you're not performing a sacrifice. Simple as that. For that to become a sacrifice, for any of these to become a sacrifice, you have to give up your own self. That means that death and birth have to be in play in you. For that to be a sacrifice, all three factors have to be at play. If in your giving of the teachings, you are dying, that is your ego, your pride, your envy is dying, then yes, that can become a sacrifice. And the birth from that is the birth of the students, the growth of the students. Those three factors have to be at play. So then that becomes a yajna, a sacrifice. And that's true for any of these. If in giving material things or giving fearlessness, we are dying psychologically, that becomes a ritual sacrifice of ourselves on behalf of others. That is what carries us up the paramitas, so that yajna becomes prajna. When our consciousness, the jna, is carried by the ya, the light, the wind, the vehicle, through all the paramitas in our actions to wisdom, prajna. And the prajna is Christ itself. That's why the Gita says, the world is bound by actions other than those performed for the sake of sacrifice. Do thou therefore, O son of Kunti, perform action for that sake, for sacrifice alone, free from attachment. In other words, the Gita itself, in its entirety, is saying simply this: act on behalf of divinity, do not expect anything in return, and then you will be performing the sacrifice and be carried up to the divine. Study the Gita, that's what it states. And we see that expressed here in this teaching of Jesus. Jesus in this painting is the lowest. He has lowered himself to washing the dirty feet of his disciples. They didn't wear Nikes and Adidas and stuff back then. They went barefoot in the dirty streets with manure and all that in the roads. So he's washing the filthiness from them, their psychological filthiness, and humbling himself to do it and not asking for anything. Not asking for attention, for thanks, for money, nothing. He's only giving what they need. Just giving and giving and giving. That is the example that one has to emulate in order for your yajna, your sacrifice, to become prajna, which is wisdom. Do you have any questions? I knew it.
I agree that some of the ancient peoples, if they were in a highly spiritual state, they would give themselves physically to be sacrificed by a priest, and then that kind of got corrupted. Or is that in itself black magic? In other words, if you're in agreement with giving your body to allow the blood to run in the temple, is that also black magic, or is it, you're giving your physical body?
There are cases in different traditions in which initiates willingly died to preserve life for others. Jesus is an example of that. Willingly died. And there are others. The Buddha gave several examples of previous existences in which he died to preserve life. He was not the only initiate to do so. So there are cases. And yes, that has been misinterpreted by certain groups and propagated a lot of misunderstandings and black magic, black practices, black rituals. So yes.
Also, you can see it's the whole thing is like obviously it's an alchemical process where the cosmic Christ sacrifices himself. And in our manure, like they say in alchemy, in the dung, is where the work takes place.
That's right.
So it's like the reflection kind of, then you have to do what Christ does in order to sacrifice yourself the way he sacrificed to create this physical.
That's exactly right.
To create those worlds within.
We have to sacrifice our will, our desire, following the example of Christ and the guidance of Christ, which comes inside of us, not from outside. And the only way you can access that is by awakening. So that points for me something that I neglected to say. So thank you for the question. And that is simply this. We have this, many students have this concept that sacrifice, how do I put it? That in order for us to effectively sacrifice, we have to abide by certain sorts of restrictions or rules. And the only rule that you have to follow is the guidance of your innermost. So, for example, many people think that in order for them to be able to teach spirituality, they have to have the approval of someone else. And this is not true. The only approval you need is from your innermost. But then that begs the question, do you have the ability to get it? Do you have the capacity to get permission or guidance from your innermost? And if you don't, then you certainly have no place to be teaching yet. That answers your question. Right? So those who have that longing to teach or that urgency to teach, good. Work towards it. Earn it. Listen to your heart, to your guidance that you get through your dreams and your visions and your practices. And if that is your path, your being will put you in it. It will be unavoidable. That's my case, for example. I don't like being in front of a crowd, but I have to do it. And I do it, and for me it's a sacrifice. I don't enjoy it. I don't like attention. But I do it because that's what I'm supposed to do. I have to. And if it were up to me, I would be not here. I'd be alone somewhere else. So part of what I'm pointing out there is that for each person to find their sacrifice, their way of helping, it will be a very odd mixture for you. According to my experience, it will be a sacrifice for you. It will not be easy. It will cost you. But it will prove fruitful for others. And that's one way you measure if it's genuine. Are others benefiting from your action? Truly benefiting? Getting the teaching? Growing as a soul, as a consciousness? Becoming better people? That is a good measure of it. And the other measure is, are you dying? Is your ego dying? So that's why you have to always have those three factors in your awareness. Question?
Does sacrifice
Sometimes. Usually. The greatest ones are painful. But not always. It's a mixture. And the reason I say it that way is this way. In a genuine sacrifice, the ego dies. That's painful. But in a genuine sacrifice, the consciousness is being born, and that's beautiful. So it's a mixture.
I'm thinking of sacrifice from a vocational perspective. I mean, there's a lot any one of us could do in order to inspire others to feel fearless or to protect them. We could move to a third world country. We could work for nonprofit organizations. I mean, these are very basic examples of the ways in which we could spend our time on the behalf of others. But on the other hand, there are things that we all love to do, things that inspire us and in which the largest percentage of what we feel as our being is engaged and involved. You know, there are many of us who feel that we're called to be artists, but we could be doing other things which are on their face more sacrificial, more dedicated to humanity. And that's
the conflict between the different parts of our psyche. We have many parts in our psyche, and we're in a great disarrangement. If you're really dedicated to achieving liberation from suffering and helping others to achieve that, then along that process, you will find the vocation of your being. That is the mission, the work that your being can do through you. And that will be something very beautiful, very enjoyable, but also painful. Because in order for you to do it, all the other parts of you that are opposed to that have to die. So it may be to do writing or music or teaching or developing any other avenue of life according to your idiosyncrasy. But that is according to your being, not your personality, not your ego necessarily. So your vocation may be something you have no idea about. It could also be something that you already know how to do. That's a conflict or an equation that each person has to solve for themselves. The only way to achieve it is to put these factors in motion today. Work on achieving the three factors, putting them in motion. The egos that you can recognize, the defects you can recognize, work on killing them. The virtues, work on giving birth to them. And work on learning what it means to sacrifice for others. To put the importance, the health, the benefit, the protection and safety and security of others before yourself. Now all of this implies something really significant. It implies taking advantage of what you have and putting it to work. For example, you stated a great example that many people say, well, if I sacrifice for humanity, maybe I should move to Africa and go live with the natives. And it doesn't mean that. Your being didn't put you in Africa. He put you where you live now. That means you need to work there. Work where you are with what you have and transform it for the greater good. If you already have an education and a job, use it. Take advantage of it. If you're in a relationship or a marriage, take advantage of it. Transform it into something beneficial for others. Don't seek something different. We are put in a situation by a karma, by our own action. The only way to change it is to change it, not to move somewhere else. Because if you go somewhere else, you're going to take all that same baggage with you. It'll just change faces, but it will be the same problems. So if you really want to change where you are with what you have. Work with what you've got. Take advantage of it. Use it. More questions?
How can we encourage students to sacrifice?
How can we encourage students to sacrifice? I suppose you can do that by being a good example. And I suppose you can do that by pointing out where there are needs. It seems to me that most people, even though we all suffer with the ego, most of us really want to do good. We really sincerely want to make the world a better place, even if we have wrong ideas about how to do it. And I think for instructors and guides of any level, the way to help students is to help them to see the truth, using the teaching and pointing out the places where there are suffering. And thereby we can offer each other inspiration. So that would be my suggestion. Another question back there?
I died a little during this lecture.
That's...
keep that going, forget this stuff almost immediately. I forget that stuff almost immediately.
Yeah, so the questioner is stating that they died a little in this lecture, which I'm very glad to hear that. And how can we keep that going? This is precisely the problem in the beginning, is that we don't have continuity. And it's very difficult for the beginning student to develop continuity. It takes a lot of willpower, a lot of effort and discipline. So it's simply that. Be aware of what you feel and be aware of its value to you. And then later when you forget it, remember it and go back to studying again. And this is simply the process. It's a process of remembering and forgetting until little by little you don't forget anymore. It's not easy, but it's the only way. There's no artificial way to achieve that. It has to be natural, intuitive. So study, practice.
How did Master Jesus encourage us to sacrifice?
How did Jesus encourage us to sacrifice? It seems to me he did it primarily through his example. If you study the Gospels, and you will see the symbolic interpretation of his life there, and everything he did was for someone else. If you study the Scripture, you'll find that in all of those books, there's not a single thing he did for himself. Doesn't that say something? And how many of us can say that about our own lives? It seems to me that all of us were created from the same basic elements that Jesus was made from. And therefore, we have the same potential. For us to realize that potential is a matter of us wanting to do it. So if we can take what we have, analyze it thoroughly, throw out what is useless and harmful, and encourage and empower what is beneficial, we can render a great change. Not only for ourselves, but the people around us. One person can change the course of life on a planet. It has been done before, and it will be done again. And any one of us can do that. It's simply a question of having the will to sacrifice enough to achieve it. That's the only limitation. We are the only limitation, ourselves. Any other question?
How can I be helpful to humanity?
How can you be helpful to humanity? Yeah, kill your ego. Learn about what in you causes suffering and stop letting it cause suffering. For all the beginners, that is the way we begin. I know that we all have these beautiful ideals about becoming great masters and leading a population into the absolute. That's a beautiful movie or something. Make a beautiful story. But the reality is that nothing of that can be achieved as long as we have the ego. So we start with our sacrifice here and now, today, by sacrificing our ego and giving birth to virtue in our hearts and minds.
Talking about fear, Shantideva, I guess, said, when a swordsman drops his sword, the first fight is to pick up the sword again, right? And when a meditator forgets himself, the first fight is to remember the spheres of hell and to be mindful of himself again.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a fear factor there.
Absolutely. So fear in the role in spirituality has to be looked at very carefully. So you're pointing out the example of how Shantideva talks about fear as a way of putting yourself back into the proper perspective of remembering the nature of the path. And this is important. But we have to understand the difference between that fear when you suddenly realize you're on the edge of a cliff and you can fall over the edge. That's one kind of fear. And another kind of fear is when you're down safe in the valley and you're thinking about being on the edge of the cliff and you feel terrified. That's different, isn't it? That's the difference. So that natural aversion to falling off the cliff when you're actually there, that's healthy. That's natural. That's the natural inclination of your preservation of life. And we need that. And we need it consciously. We need that conscious impulse to preserve consciousness awake and active and aware, present here and now. Without that, we will fall, without a doubt. What we don't need is that animal fear that's constantly afraid of everything. That's different. And we all have that. Any other questions?
I have an anger problem.
Oh!
And I yell a lot. What form of sacrifice can help me replace my anger with a good quality?
Well, that's a beautiful question. The question is that the questioner says that he has an anger or she has an anger problem. So what can we do to transform that into a good quality? Firstly, when any discursive quality is emerging in us, whether it's anger or pride or envy, the most important thing is to be fully aware of it. To not avoid it, to not repress it, but neither to indulge it and let it express through us. We have to really observe this. And this requires a great deal of skill to learn to do this. So that when that anger emerges and you feel that impulse to yell and shout, don't yell and shout. You have to restrain those impulses, but not repress them. You want to see in its fullness everything about that anger that you can see. What it wants, what it thinks, what it feels, and at the same time, see how it's affecting others around you. That perception, if you're successfully able to do this even one time, it will change your life. It will change your life. When you really see that anger fully blossomed in you, and you see its impact on your environment and on the people around you, and you see the suffering in yourself and others, when you become cognizant of that, you will recognize what a threat anger is. So that's the first part. Become cognizant of it, then and there. Then secondly, meditate. When you have some peace and quiet, when you have some time, sit and remember that event, contemplate it, analyze it, play it in your mind, play it in your imagination, and sink into sleepiness. And allow your imagination to flow, and allow your being to show you more. So pray. That process allows you to stop intellectualizing, to stop reacting, but instead to open up your mind and heart to allow your inner divinity to show you more about it. And then you approach it in the same way. Whatever you see, you don't react, you don't indulge or run away, you observe. That's, in simple terms, how to do that. And what you'll find is where that anger is coming from, what it wants, how it acts, how it manipulates you, what it thinks, what it feels, and the totality of that information will give you a lot of clues into how you can change your behavior for the better. And what you'll discover is that that anger has been fooling you for a long time and has a lot of subtle tricks that it uses to manipulate you and take your energy. So then it's up to you to change it. Anger is difficult to work on. So is envy. So is lust. So is pride. But we have a great, what do you call the person who's working in your corner of the boxing ring? You know, the boxer's out in the ring boxing and they got somebody there helping them? A corner man. We have a great corner man. His name is Jesus. You can call him Yeshua. You can call him Buddha. You can call him Christ. But you've got someone right behind you who will help you. Who will help you to overcome Goliath. You see, we're David. Consciousness, small, weak, no skill, no muscles. And we're looking at Goliath, a giant. And the only thing we have is faith. So if you have that faith and you work sincerely in this way, you can conquer the giant of anger and the giant of lust. But you can do it because you've got someone behind you, which is Christ. More questions?
there a symbolism? Since we know that Peter was very reactive.
Why did Jesus wash Peter's feet first? Actually, I don't know. I would suspect that Peter, since he's a representation of the sexual energy and the sexual teachings, it's related with that. That the first place we need to be cleaned and washed is in our sexuality. Peter also relates to our pineal gland, which is in the center of the brain. And this is the place where the forces of divinity guide us and help us. So for us to be able to perceive the instruction and guidance we need from above, we need to clean and purify and energize our pineal gland. So there are a lot of correspondences there. Thank you very much.
The presentation of this lecture was made possible by donations from listeners like you. Will you help others to benefit from this knowledge? Most Gnostic schools recommend a donation of $10 to $20 per lecture. Every single donation helps. Make a donation now at gnosticradio.org. For questions and deeper understanding of this lecture, we invite you to explore the books published by Glorian Publishing and available from booksellers worldwide. Visit gnosticbooks.org to learn more. Thank you. May all beings be happy. Welcome to the presentation of a lecture from Gnostic Radio, a free public service from the Gnostic tradition of Samael Aun Beod. Gnosis is the root wisdom of the world's greatest knowledge. Gnosis is a universal teaching of practical science, whose goal is absolute liberation from suffering and the complete development of the human being. This lecture is one of hundreds available as free downloads, podcasts, or transcriptions. Our lectures range in topic and complexity in order to address the many needs of humanity. We invite you to browse our library of lectures to find teachings that suit you. Twice a month, Gnostic Radio broadcasts live and includes a free online classroom allowing listeners to see images, read related scriptures, and ask questions of the speaker. To learn how to participate, visit gnosticradio.org. Gnostic Radio is a service of Glorian Publishing, a non-profit organization. The lectures and radio broadcast have been made possible by the financial support of listeners like you. Most spiritual schools recommend a donation of $10 to $20 per lecture. To make a donation, visit gnosticradio.org. Now, with heartfelt wishes for the end of suffering for all creatures, we begin the lecture. May all beings be happy.